If you follow my channel, you know that a little while ago I did a video on Invasion of the Air Eaters, which was a metagaming micro game from 1979 and one of the very first war games I ever purchased and played for many years without really understanding that it was a war game. You can find out more about that turn of events in that video. There was a sequel to that game called The Air Eaters Strike Back. This was published in 1981 as a metagame from Metagaming, and it came in a box like this, and it truly was a sequel. It expands on the concepts that were in Invasion of the Air Eaters, and in fact, as we sort of pull back here, you can see down in the corner, there is this map of the Earth here in the corner of the bigger map from the game, The Air Eaters Strike Back, that is a replica of the smaller map here. That was the entire map from Invasion of the Air Eaters. So there's the Invasion of the Air Eaters map, and down in the corner, here it is, reproduced here. And what's neat about this game, The Air Eaters Strike Back, is that it truly is a sequel. It comes into play sometime after the events of the Invasion of the Air Eaters, when the Earth was invaded by aliens who were taking our air and causing us to die, basically. Here, a century has passed since the Air Eater invasion of the Earth. The terrible devastation is repaired. Man isn't alone, but he does forget. Suddenly, the Air Eater's mothership returns. There's actually two motherships returning in this game. And we continue on with the bitter struggle for survival, battle to the death. The Air Eaters Strike Back is a strategic simulation of the alien invasion of the inner solar system in the 21st century. And we will demonstrate what's going on here, but it's important to understand it is a true sequel to the first game that was published in this series, the only other game that was published in this series, and there are some overlaps, but it is also an independent game. The level is listed as Advanced Competition for 2, aged 14 and up. Playability, moderate complexity, playtime 3 to 6 hours at moderate, and we have a map, 360 counters, rules, and data sheets. There is, complete with the addition of this game, a solitaire scenario. That is what I'm going to be focusing on here. It doesn't utilize all of the mechanisms of the game. I'll talk a little bit about the limitations of the solo scenario, but that's the one that I'm going to be presenting, demonstrating at least part of here for my channel. And the final thing I want to say by way of introduction is that this game and a couple of others came to me through the total generosity of one of my viewers, Dave, who contacted me and offered to send me some of his games that he was either not playing anymore or hadn't played and wanted to see some videos on, and didn't make it a condition, but suggested that I might enjoy them, and he was totally right, and that was really cool of him. And of the games he sent me, this is the first one that I pulled out because I had been interested in it for a few years, again, because of my knowledge of this game and my actual ownership of this game for decades. So let's take a look at what we have when the Air Eaters strike back. First, let's take a look at the map here. This is one of those maps that has a lot going on as I sort of show you the overview, and I apologize for the glare. Try to work with it as best as possible, but at least you can see the lovely clouds in the sky. So what we have here, there's several sections on the map. The section that I'm showing you here with the star at the center, I've got the planets already placed, represents the solar system out to the orbit of Jupiter. And Jupiter is right out here. This is placement based on a randomized table that exists in the rules. You roll a d6 and place based on what you get. The dotted spaces in this section here are the asteroid belt, and we have 4 asteroid mining bases placed already. And the planets themselves, as I said, they are on counters, and they will be moving around at the beginning of each turn. There are smaller maps around that have hexes, and these are the planetary surfaces. So we have here, let's come up and just show you, for example, Mercury is here, and we have Callisto here. This is in orbit around Jupiter. And you can see here we've got the space that is what says on Jupiter. And we have Venus depicted. Obviously, here's Mars. These are some of Earth's protector corvettes in orbit around Mars. I haven't placed these yet. These are the alien units. I'm sort of halfway through setting up in orbit around Venus. And then this is the larger scale map that I showed you that depicts the rest of the world. The planetary systems, as I said, they have boxes for units that are in orbit around it. And what else do we have? There is a track here that is going to help us keep track of the atmospheric index and the Terran production. There is in this game, and I'll go over it a little bit, but I detailed it a lot in my video on the air eater, so I'm going to try to avoid too much duplication. But there is a lot of production, industrial output that comes into play in this game as the Earth beings are as one trying to build up their defenses and use what their production capabilities are to fight off these alien beings. And so this is there's a tracker here for it, which is quite helpful. There's a sequence of play, which we'll go over, and just pulling in to show you here on Luna, for example, this one you see, and all of these numbers here on Earth, these are representative of industrial output. So because we have, for example, Mars has been partially colonized, it has some production value, and some of the other planets and planetary bodies do as well. So we start the game here per the scenario rules at a Terran production level of 58. A key part of the game and what happens as the aliens attack is the reduction of our production. And so these devastation markers come into play. They will indicate that something has been destroyed. So to give an example here, we're going to indicate some destruction here of along the nature of industrial production. We would put that marker there. Walk you through just a few of the counters here. The aliens have, well, I mentioned they have motherships. Now, here's the mothership right here, this MS. This is their mothership. They've got a couple of them. The movement value is indicated here. U means unlimited movement, so they can go absolutely anywhere. And they have bases that some of this will be familiar to you if you listen to my video or have played the other game, because they're similar. And actually a little benefit of this is you could use these counters in playing the other game, because the counters in the other game are those sort of strip paper counters from those little micro games. Not very good, but these are nice thick counters that have really held up amazingly well over the years. So these are bases. They have crawler units that are their ground attack vehicles, represented by a CW. They also have unlimited movement. These are their air converters that they will place that are going to be sucking up the air, and you see they have no movement value, so once placed they cannot be moved. Same thing was true with bases. And what else do they have? This is a lander. The lander is going to be transporting the units from the mothership down. And they have these escorts here with also unlimited movement, and the escorts move around and wreak havoc, basically. We, as the Earth players, are the black counters here with blue. We have a range of both space units. The corvettes, for example, are a space unit. I showed you that in orbit. The destroyers here are more powerful than that. We have cruisers, which are represented by the CA counters here. Cruisers right there. And we have also some ground units. We have some Army, Land Army, and Air Force. Not too many of those. that are represented here. And again, in this game, everything is very, very abstracted. So the army, for example, I can't remember exactly how many men it's supposed to represent, but hundreds and thousands, basically. Very abstracted. Of course, we're looking at the solar system. We're looking at the whole planet Earth. We have, new to this game from the other one, some bounce infantry battalions, and those are represented here. Also some ground forces. And then we have water forces. We have submarines here. We have improved submarines. I mentioned the industrial production will allow you to improve some of these units, and the submarines are one of them. We also have transport and improved transport, and we also have some fighter squadrons. I think I omitted that. So we have a range of units here, and then these markers. We have here some asteroids that come into play. Not in our scenario, actually. I don't think a free asteroid. I'll talk about the additional variation in the fuller scenarios. The solitaire scenario, as I said, is a little bit more limited, and then all of these destruction markers that represent the kind of slow chipping away of the Earth's production from the aliens. So here we have the Quasar ship, and in the Quasar ship assault solitaire scenario, which is what we're playing, the aliens start out with two of them. And actually, per the rules, they simply have two of them, and it kind of functions like a almost ogre-like situation, if you're familiar with that game, where you're fighting these massive units, but there's only one, well, in this case, two and one. I find that less interesting, so I'm going to be bringing in, during the course of this scenario, some more alien units, and that is going to be based on this alien reinforcements table here, which is part of the introductory game, which is a two-player game, but I'm sort of doing a mishmash. So we're going to be bringing in more alien units per turn, up to turn 24 if we make it that long. But our victory conditions are going to remain what they are with this stated scenario. And the victory conditions here state the game ends when both quasar ships are destroyed, or when all the Terran IUs are devastated. That would mean a loss for us. And then victory, the sort of level of victory is determined by the number of IUs that remain at the end of the game, when presumably, hopefully, you have destroyed both of these. Now, how do you destroy these? Well, this is where the game gets interesting, because as we turn to look here at some of the combat results tables here, this is the space combat table, and you will note that the quasar ship QS is indicated in the column here. It cannot be destroyed by escorts or corvettes. If you look all the way to the left, the firing unit, escorts and corvettes cannot even fire on it. The DD units, which I can't remember what they are called right now, they cannot fire either. You need what is in the bottom two rows in order to successfully fire, and really the NSC, AWS, and FTR, the FTR is the fighter. These only hit on a 1 die roll, so that's not very likely, and you're really only getting a 50% chance, even if you're fighting against, or if your firing unit is a quasar, which it's not going to be, or the BB, which is, can't remember, whatever that is. How do you get these? Well, you have to produce them, because at the beginning of the game, as the Earth player, you're just with some lowly corvettes. That's it. So the key to the solo scenario here, and indeed the rest of the way this game plays, which is part of the reason why I like it, is this section down here, parts 5 and 6 of the turn, your production, and then your R&D. Because over the course of the game, what you need to do is to protect enough of your industrial units to generate these points that you can then use to further develop, so that you get to a place where you even have the equipment and the technology to succeed, in theory at least, against the quasar ship. And unless you get really far, you never even going to get to a 50% chance of that. A bit of time has passed since I filmed the first portion of this video. I've been spending some time with the game and realizing that to make the solo play interesting and to pick up really the second part of what makes this game tense and rich, you have to modify that scenario that is provided by the rules, the Quasar ship assault solitaire scenario that I was showing you. And so I'm going to show you here my modified sequence of play briefly, and then we'll dip into the game and look how it plays out. You are starting with a solar orbit, and I should say this is just the modifications here that I'm pulling in from both the introductory two-player game as well as the introductory overall, or I should say the intermediate game two-player. So you start with solar orbit. This is the planets moving around and any spaceships that are in orbit around them moving. Then you have the Terran movement, and in the solo game, we're only dealing with air, and we're keeping it that way, so we're not doing any ground movement. The aliens move. You've got your space combat. Then you have your alien orbital bombardment, which is in essence the alien combat. It is aliens who are in orbit around planets, have the opportunity to do devastation to industrial units or units that are flying around. Then you've got your Terran production and your Terran R&D. We talked a little bit about that, and I'll show you how that works when we go into the gameplay. And then we are bringing in alien reinforcements. We're bringing in atmospheric conversion. Again, this is the invasion of the Air Eaters, or the Air Eaters strike back, and what they do is they eat our air. And the basic solitaire scenario that's provided in the rules just omits this entirely. And you need that there because part of the game is to try to get to your victory conditions before you run out of air. So you need to deal with the atmospheric converters that the aliens are placing and the consequences of them, and I'll show you how that works. We also then have alien production that we're bringing in, and finally the alien deployment of their bases and their atmospheric converters, which are some of the things that they make. Now, the tables that are provided here, just show you a couple of them, are really great because you can effectively play this solo, even expanding it the way that I have, because I showed you this already. I think you're given an automatic table for alien reinforcements to come in, so you don't need to guess on that. And just pulling up here a little bit to show you, this is the description of the Terran R&D and what the prerequisites are and what you can get once you have met those requirements. We're only going to be researching and developing certain of these, not all of them, because again, we're not doing any ground combat here, and some of these have to do with ground or sea, for example. We're not doing that either. And finally here over on the right, you can see there is a table for the alien production, and they say not used in the introductory game. This is from the intermediate game, but it very easily allows you to fold this into your solo scenario for more complexity. One of the things that I have not been able to figure out, and if anyone watching this knows, is this line here of critical factor, where we have an indication here: sulfur, temperature, air pressure, solar energy, water, heavy metals, complex. I have no idea what this is referring to. So I've looked throughout the rules. I don't see any reference to this. So I'm basically ignoring it. And the way the alien production is going to work based on this table is simply based on the location of the base and the die roll that you get, and then choosing what you are going to develop. So, for example, if you were on Jupiter and you rolled a 1, you would have the option of developing either a base, an atmospheric converter, a crawler. Well, a crawler is a land-based, so we're not actually using that, crawlers and landers in our scenario. And I'm just disregarding this. I don't know how significantly that's making an error in the game, but I truly cannot figure that out. So, as with all of the modifications I make to games, I say this pretty much in every video because pretty much in every game I play, I'm making some modifications. I aim to be balanced and I aim to be consistent. So I will not change a rule once I have started playing with it, and I will not, at least knowingly, make a rule that makes the game totally unbalanced because that's boring and I don't really care whether I win or lose. I just care that there's tension and story. So, with all of this in mind, let's take a look at where I am in the game right now and show you a little bit about what goes on. This is the end of the first turn, and I want to just show you this and then move on to the end of a much later turn. At the beginning, we did our random placement of the planets, and then we began to rotate them around. This Corvette here is in the orbit of Mars due to, you can see it here, it was in that orbit of Mars and we placed it on this bigger map because it may want to move around. That we did during our movement phase. The aliens came in and they had landed here, their quasar ship here is in orbit around Mars and in orbit here. And we also conducted some combat here during the alien orbital bombardment. Now, reminder, we are not conducting any land combat. So in a later turn, you can see that there are some atmospheric converters placed here, this AC and bases. This is actually on the ground. These corvettes here are flying around, but only combat is going to be aerial. So really none of these hexes coming into play. This is just done so they're not all in this teeny little square around the planet. In a game where you're having land combat as well as air and sea combat, obviously you would differentiate and place them here, but we're just doing this because we have the space and it makes sense, but all combat is going to be air to air. And that's what happened here. During the alien orbital bombardment, this big ship attacked us, attacked our industrial unit as they could, and they destroyed it. So we had one industrial unit here, and now we have, in effect, 0. So we lost that and we had to reflect that under our production. We had started with, per the scenario, 58 production, and when we got to our production and R&D phase, we actually only started with 57, and I'll show you what we did with that. The next thing that then happened was this atmospheric conversion placement, and using these tables, we had bases here placed on Mars with an atmospheric converter. This came in a bit later, and Io had a base and a converter here. What this means is that as long as these remain undestroyed, they are going to tick down the atmospheric index on the places that they are by 1. So, for example, here, pulling in just to take a look, we have the starting values. The Earth atmospheric index starts at 20, Mars 24, Io began at 40. At the end of this turn, we ticked that down, and Venus begins at 15 and remains because it does not have a converter placed. But as these tick down to 0, the planet becomes destroyed, and ultimately, if we have nowhere to go, the game is over, and as the planets become destroyed, we are losing out on potential victory points for them. Finally, the alien production phase happened, and they were able to produce an escort, which is up here on the mothership. I don't know how clearly you can really see this. It is here, and this is going to come down to a planet with an atmospheric converter in the next turn. There is no atmospheric converter converter available right now because they didn't produce it, but they will be aiming to do that in the next turn, and they have the escort to bring it, so that's not really great for us. And that is basically where we ended on this turn. What I skipped over, and I will show you, is what we chose to do, what we were able to do in our R&D. And here's where some of the calculations come in. I mentioned here we had we dropped down to 57 to start because of the space combat that happened. But because of that space combat, we met some of the prerequisites for conducting successful, or I should say conducting R&D with a bit of a modifier. We chose to purchase 2 corvettes. These do not require any R&D. They cost 10 each, so that brought us to 37, and ultimately we deployed them here on Mars. We then conducted R&D to try to research a destroyer. Because we met the prerequisite for that, which was space combat having occurred this turn, which it did up here, as you recall, there was space combat where we lost that industrial unit. Doesn't matter whether we win or lose, just that it happened. We would have been successful on a 1 to 3 roll. Unfortunately, we rolled a 4, so we wasted that. We were down to 27. We tried again, spent another 10 to try, and we rolled a 2. So what that means is the next turn we can purchase a destroyer for 15 industrial units. You can't purchase it on the same turn that you research it because the order is you produce and purchase and then you research for the next time. But we know we can do that next time. Then we were down to 17. We spent another 10 to try to research and develop a fighter, and we rolled a 1. We were down to 7 then. We rolled a 1. So that means that the next turn we can purchase a fighter. That's key because if you recall, fighters are one of the things that are necessary to have to potentially destroy these big fighting machines that are key to our victory conditions. So we want to try to get as many fighters as we can. And this is what it looks like at the end of the first turn. Let's fast forward and see what it looks like a bunch of turns later. So here is where we are looking over the Earth here at the end of turn 9, and things are not great. You can see that we had a lot of combat. We've had some sort of perpetual losses of our industrial output, and this is really causing us problems here. Oh, I see the I don't even have the counter. Oh, here we're down. Our production is down at 3 right now after that turn. The problem is it's become a bad cycle. We are desperate to develop. We did do some fighters, and we actually eliminated one of the 2 of these. I can't remember what they're called, quasi, whatever, the big ones that we needed to. But because we needed to do this combat, to do the R&D, to do the development, and we keep losing, sort of chipping away at our industrial production. The next time we try to do development, we invest in R&D, and if we're unsuccessful, it's basically wasted money. And I'm remembering now, this game is so similar, obviously similar to the Invasion of the Air Eaters, so much so that actually the rules here say you can pick up verbatim some of the rules in the other game and use them, which I have not done. But one of the issues that I had with that game, and which is true here, is that you don't ever get any rewards for continually trying to do R&D on the same thing. And to me, that isn't modeling real life very well, because if you're doing research in an area, eventually the failures are going to contribute to a greater chance of success. And that just doesn't happen here. And that was a bit of an issue in the other game. And it definitely is an issue here. The other issue, I think, again, as we pull back sort of and look at the way things stand here, despite the fact that we did eliminate this unit, we have not been able to do anything more than get to the fighter level. We can't get to the battleship level, which is going to give us just a 50% chance of eliminating the other one. And moreover, our atmosphere is just coming really low. So we're basically in a downward spiral, and honestly, I'm not even sure I'm going to play out the rest of this game. I'm probably only halfway through. Well, it might end before I get in another 9 turns, but I don't know if it's that I should have stuck with the actual scenario where you're in effect just fighting, well, it's not there, these 2 units and not getting all the reinforcements, or somehow modified this atmospheric conversion index. I'm not really sure. There's something that's not quite working here with what I've done. As a 2-player game, I can see that this is just as rich and as involving and three-dimensional as Invasion of the Air Eaters. As a solo modification, even though, ironically, this has the solo scenario where Invasion does not. If you watched my video on Invasion, you could see that, to me, playing that solo worked really pretty effectively. Whereas here, using their solo scenario, I played their solo scenario as written, and I found it way too easy and not that interesting. I tried to modify it, and I didn't do a great job. I think I need to go back and revisit the ideas that I was trying to implement from the main rules to come up with something that gives the decision point of the game a little bit later, because I feel like there's still probably half the game to go, and there's almost no way that I can get anywhere. And as I said earlier, I don't really care about winning or losing, but I want to feel like there's tension, and at this point, I think the tension is just depleted from this game. Just a few final thoughts here. These 2 games really shine, I think, because of the interplay between economic and resource management and actual combat, even though the combat itself is quite basic, and I didn't demonstrate that in the video I did on Invasion of the Air Eaters, and I didn't really demonstrate it here, but we looked a little more closely at the combat tables, and I'll show you them again to point out just how, it's very simplistic in a sense, because you are given the option here. Here are the CRTs. You've got space combat and land combat and underwater combat. Again, in the main game, we were only doing space. And you're simply indicating what the firing unit is and what the role is to take out. And in many cases, you can see it's 100%, 1 to 6. And then in some cases, it's only a 1. It's really not very complicated at all. There's not a lot of modifications. There's not a lot of terrain effects. It's pretty basic. But that aside, the combination of that combat factor with the production and economic element put together does give a very three-dimensional depiction of the Earth under assault. For a sci-fi game, for a theme and a game with many war game elements to it, I mean, it is a war game, this is pretty unique still, I think. It's very easy to pick up the Air Eaters Strike Back if you're familiar with Invasion of the Air Eaters. Many of the rules are similar. I was able to, because I hadn't played this that long ago, I was able to get right into this very easily. I think if you're not familiar with the system, it took me a while, even returning to this after many years having played it, took me a while to figure that out, and this particular rule book is relatively disorganized. This one is better organized, but it's still fairly complicated. It's a complicated game. I mentioned earlier, they said 3 to 6 hours playing time. Excuse me. I could see that, to be honest with you, especially 2-player. I could really see that. It is not a light game. It looks like a light game, and before I got into it, I thought it was going to be a light game, but it is complex and difficult to win, difficult to keep the production going, to get your engine in the right emphasis to counter the aliens and what they're trying to do, and at the same time make progress on your own development so that you can both protect, defend, as well as attack. And those types of decisions and challenges are what make the game pretty cool. After a hiatus of many, many years, I've enjoyed my return to the world of the Air Eaters, and again, just want to thank my viewer Dave for his total generosity in sending me this game and some others that I'm going to be featuring in the future on my channel. Thanks for watching.